AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, for another episode of Politics Matters, how civics, politics, and law affect you. I'm your host, Bruce Klopfleisch. Thanks for listening to the show. If you have any questions or any comments you want to make about the show, email it to comment@am950radio.com. So I am taping this show 6 days ahead of the election. And it's going to be played on the radio like 2 days before the election. So before I get into I'm going to talk about the election here first. But before I get into that, Brett, you got an announcement about the station and our election coverage on Tuesday night.
Yeah, absolutely. We are going to be doing election coverage on AM 950. I'll be a part of it. You'll be a part of it as well, but it's going to be an exciting night coming up on Tuesday. Hopefully a blue wave where we can finally dispose of MAGA. But we'll have Matt McNeil hosting our coverage from 7 until 9 o'clock to get the evening started off. He'll have Cliff Schechter, Jeff Stein, and others on his show. Then you and I are going to be hosting starting at 9 o'clock up until about 11 o'clock or so, depending on what results are coming in and from where. But right. We'll be giving those results. We'll also have Greg Bakken in Election Central, who's going to be doing more detailed tracking of the results as they come in. So make sure you listen on the radio airwaves, or more importantly, watch us on Facebook or YouTube, because we're going to have some really cool kind of TV-style broadcast going, too, with all sorts of graphics showing results. So make sure you tune in. Election night.
Yeah, I heard Greg's going to be trying to do some of those graphics, and Matt's got some nice, good guests coming on.
So either way, my point is, it's going to be much better than trying to watch the cable networks. We're just going to give you the national spin and the panic and nothing really useful. We'll have live, local, and trusted progressive coverage.
Yeah. Oh my God, it's going to be so close. I mean, you can just hear this stuff now, and this is some of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about here in my first couple segments here. So. But we'll start here with the upcoming election. I mean, after all, that's one of the reasons why, you listen to AM 950 radios. They get the progressive side of things, or if you're an independent or even a Republican listening to the show, you want to hear about some of the stuff that we're doing or what we're thinking about. So the election's coming up. I know a lot of people have already voted. I voted last Friday. By the way, when I went to early vote, I've been early voting for years, because on election night or election day, I'm driving to work and back. So it's tough sometimes for me to get in and early or late enough to vote. So I early vote. And for this time, I didn't have to wait at all. So, and the numbers, when I was in line and put my ballot in, the numbers, there's a higher number than what it's been in previous years. So I think turnout's up, which I think is going to help the Democrats, and I've been hearing that around the country too. So if you haven't voted yet, you can still early vote. Now again, if you're hearing this on Sunday, you can still early vote on Monday, the day before the election, in Minnesota at least. Okay, so you can do that, or you can go Tuesday. Brett, I think you're going on election day, right? Did I hear that right?
That is correct. I typically go on election day for whatever reason. I just like the festivities of doing it on the actual day. But I make sure I for sure get there. If there was any reason I would vote ahead of time. Yeah. So, you can go Monday if if Tuesday doesn't work for you, or you don't want to wait in line maybe where you normally vote. Well, you can early vote on Monday. By the way, voting hours in Minnesota are from 7:30 in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. So I hear occasionally people say, "Well, I'm working that day. I can't go vote." Well, you can vote. Be there at 7:30 if you don't, work until 9 o'clock or something, or go at night. Or again, you can also go Monday, go early vote. So, one other thing though, Minnesota has a law. Some states do, some states don't, but Minnesota is one that has it, where your employer has to let you off work on Tuesday to let you vote. And they can't take any retaliation against you for doing that. So that's contained in Minnesota Statute 204C.04. So if you're trying to leave work on election day and your employer gives you some, doesn't want you to do that, you can quote them that statute where they got to let you go and vote. And then you got to go right back to work, of course, but we have a law that allows that. So if the employer violates that, they can actually be charged potentially with a misdemeanor crime for doing that. So if your employer tries to keep you at work, go ahead and
tell them about that statute because they got to let you go. So this segment, I'm going to be talking about some of the elections that I'm going to be watching for nationally and a few locally here. But obviously everybody's going to be watching the presidential election. So I'm going to start with that one a little bit here. But I'm also going to get into the national Senate race, which I think is going to be more interesting. Because I have a feeling, I went on Philip Anthony's. I had him on my show, and we were talking about this, last week, and, I had said I think Harris is going to win, and I still do. And it might even be by more than what a lot of the people in the media are talking about, and a lot of these polls show. Let's hope so. But one of the things I'm going to be watching for on election night is some of the state results on the East Coast. They close their polls first because they're in the Eastern time zone, right? And two that I'm going to be looking at in particular are North Carolina and Georgia because those are so-called swing states. If Harris wins one of those, particularly I think North Carolina, if all the gaming that's been out there about how, what she needs to win or what Trump needs to win the Electoral College, right? All those scenarios out there that have been going on. If she wins North Carolina, I think that's going to be a good sign early on that things might be going her way a little better than what a lot of people are saying. Especially if she picks up Georgia too. And one thing about Georgia, remember the Republicans control that state in the state legislature. And Georgia's a little bit different though because last time they have 2 Democratic senators there. So it's kind of a little weird how they, the voting patterns in Georgia. So it wouldn't surprise me one bit if Harris wins Georgia as well. Or at least keeps it, pretty close. So those are the 2, at least initially, I'm going to be focusing on, as well as Florida. Now, you may be asking, well, why is Florida? Isn't that a pretty reliable Republican state? Well, let me tell you why I'm going to be watching Florida here a little bit. There's 2 things on the Florida ballot. One of them is an abortion measure, where they got enough signatures on petitions to have on their ballot a state constitutional amendment to allow abortion rights before viability or to protect the mother's health as determined by her doctor. So that's going to be on the ballot. Also on the ballot in Florida is the legalization of marijuana. So those 2 typically, if you look at voting patterns, tend to favor the Democrats, getting more people out to vote, especially more young people going out to vote. When you have abortion and weed on the ballot, it tends to get them out more, especially, first-time voters or voters, very young voters who maybe they didn't vote when they were 18, but, now they're going to. So, and I also think I've heard some reports from down in Florida where, there's some momentum down there for Harris. Now, I'm not saying she's going to win Florida, but if she can keep it close, that's going to be another good sign, I think, for the rest of the evening. Now, there is a Senate race down in Florida, which is another reason why I'm watching Florida. Rick Scott's the Republican incumbent. He's running against Debbie Mercosio-Powell. This is close, according to the polls. If you're somebody who watches polls, and again, I'm not a real big poll guy, as I've said before, but this one has been within the margin of error for a while. So if abortion and the marijuana issue get more Democrats out to vote, that could be a good sign for her and a bad sign for Rick Scott. So that's good news for Democrats if they're able to keep it close in Florida as well. So let's look at now more Senate races. And why am I really paying attention to the Senate? Well, because let's say Harris wins the presidency. Okay? Well, if the Republicans win the Senate, which a lot of people are predicting they're going to, she's not going to be able to do hardly anything she's been campaigning on because the Republicans will control the Senate. So Democrats need to keep the Senate. Because let's say one of the Supreme Court justices, let's say Justice Thomas, dies while she's president. The Republicans in the Senate are not going to put forward a nomination by Harris to fill that seat, just like they didn't when Obama tried to nominate Merrick Garland after Scalia died. They're just not going to do it. They're probably not going to approve of some of her cabinet members or other appointments. So right now, the Democrats have the Senate 51-49, at least on paper. Now, I look at it as, well, it's 50-50 because Joe Manchin is retiring in West Virginia and the Republican is going to win in West Virginia, so it's 50-50. So if Harris and Walz win, Walz will be the tie-breaking vote if it stays at 50-50 in the Senate. So let's say the Democrats lose some of those races. Well, then they're going to have to flip some current ones in order to at least keep it at 50-50. So here's, I have a list of 8 that I'm going to be talking about here that I'm going to be paying particular attention to. Number 1 is Montana. It is a Republican state. Trump will win easily. But John Tester is the Democrat who's pulled out some close elections when people have been saying he's not going to win. He's battling Tim Sheehy, who's been ahead in the polls, but Tester's been closing on those polls. And, this is what he's been doing before in his elections. Plus, Montana also has an abortion initiative on its ballot, which could drive out more Democrats. So, that's one I'm going to be watching. Another one is Wisconsin with Tammy Baldwin versus Eric Hovde. Now, Baldwin has been leading throughout in the polls, but the polls have been, narrowing lately, which is pretty typical, especially when Republicans start throwing a bunch of money. And, I've been seeing a lot of Hovde advertisements, where I live. So that one's going to be one I'm going to be watching. Hopefully Baldwin can pull that one out. Another one is Ohio with Sherrod Brown. Ohio is another Republican state. Trump will probably win Ohio. But he again, like Tester, has been pulling out some of these close elections in Ohio. He's going up against Bernie Moreno. So hopefully he can win. I have a feeling he's going to pull that one out. Next one is Michigan. So they have an open seat there because Debbie Stabenow, the Democrat, is retiring. So Alyssa Slotkin is the Democratic nominee who is a House member from Michigan. And she's going up against Mike Rogers, who is a Republican, former House member too. She's been ahead in the polls. Hopefully that continues and she's able to pull that one out. Pennsylvania is the next one. Bob Casey, the incumbent, is a Democrat going up against David McCormick. Pennsylvania, of course, is a swing state. So this is, going to be probably a close election. But, again, he's been pulling out close elections before. Hopefully he's able to do that this time around. Now, these last 3 are ones that I'm going to be watching just to see how close it's going to be and whether, I'll start with Texas, whether the Democrat may actually win in Texas. We'll see. But Ted Cruz, of course, commonly referred to as the worst senator or one of the worst. Him and I think Josh Hawley in Missouri vie for that title. He's up against Colin Allred, who is a House member from Texas. And, granted it's Texas, so, Cruz is probably favored there. But, Allred's been running a pretty good campaign. He's been going after Cruz. The issue with Texas is if you look at the vote counts in previous elections, Democrats, there's a lot of Democrats registered in Texas, but they're not all voting. Not even close, really. So Democrats got to do a better job of getting out to vote there. Plus, part of the reason that Democrats numbers aren't as great is they got some pretty stringent voter ID laws in the state of Texas. So some of the Democrats aren't able to vote because of those. So if they do get out to vote, though, that's one that I'm going to watch, and hopefully Ted Cruz goes away. I'm also going to watch one in Missouri with Josh Hawley. Now, he's favored, of course. Lucas Kunce is his opponent for the Democrats. If he can keep it close, that'll be a good sign, too, I think. Last one is Nebraska, of all places. Like, why am I watching Nebraska? Well, Deb Fischer's the incumbent Republican. She's running against an independent by the name of Dan Osborne. The Democrats have supported Osborne. He's a union guy. Said he's not going to caucus with the Republicans or the Democrats, at least initially. And in the polls, that's been pretty close for a state that Trump's going to win easily. So he's been making some headway there. So I'm going to be watching that one too, just to see how close that one is going to be. So those are the 8 Senate races I'm going to be keeping an eye on that night. House of Representatives, at the national level, the Republicans have a 6-vote lead. So Democrats basically need to flip 4 of those 6 to take over the majority again. One of the areas they can do that in, or at least get some of those back, are New York. New York has different maps now that tend to favor the Democrats, and 3 of those House seats in New York are called toss-ups now that Republicans barely won 2 years ago, and now they're going to have to defend them with these new maps. So those are some possible pickups for the Democrats. And then there's also 5 seats out in California where the Republicans barely won. Like, it was literally a week or 2 later, because California has mail-in voting and it takes a while to count all the votes there, and they were so close that it took that long to do the recounts as well. So there's some possibilities for the Democrats there to pick up some seats. Of course, they have to keep the ones they have as well. So one of the states I'm going to be watching is Wisconsin, because I think Wisconsin might have new maps now too, where a couple of those Republican seats may be closer than people are thinking. So I'm going to be watching those too. So why am I going to be watching the Senate and the House? Well, it's pretty simple. If the Republicans win one of those, let alone both of them, if they just win one of them, Harris won't be able to do what she wants to do policy-wise. Plus, let's say the Republicans win the House and win the Senate. What do you think they're going to do when they have to certify the election results if Harris wins? They're not going to dutifully say, oh, okay, she won. It's just going to be a zoo if that happens. Then let's assume that neither Trump nor Harris gets 270 Electoral College votes. Well, under our Constitution, it goes to the House of Representatives, which right now the House has 26 to 24 states, and you vote by state. You do not. It's not like a majority of 435 votes. Each state gets 1 vote, and right now the Republicans have the advantage. So if that advantage holds, Trump's going to win, even if he doesn't win the popular vote, which I don't think he will. But that's in play here as well. So the Democrats need to win both the House and the Senate to get what they want policy-wise. If the Republicans win one of those, we're going to be in a little bit of trouble passing stuff, even if Harris is elected. Same deal with the Minnesota legislature. Right? You saw what the Democrats did when the Democrats had control of the House, the Senate, and the governorship. We got a lot of stuff done. Well, there's only one Senate race, which is important because the Democrats have a 1-seat advantage in the Senate. So that's District 45, where former state senator Ann Johnson Stewart, the Democrat, is up against Kathleen Falk, if I'm pronouncing that name correctly. So this is Kelly Morrison's old seat. She resigned so she can run for Dean Phillips' seat that he vacated for Senate. So this is typically a DFL-leaning district, so hopefully Stewart can pull that one out, and then the Democrats will keep control of the Senate. But they only have a 70 to 64 advantage in the House. So here again, the Republicans need to just flip 4 of the seats, a net of 4, to take over the House. And some of those 2022 elections in the House were pretty close, and the Democrats pulled some of those out, but, we got to hold them again. One of those is District 41B, where I interviewed last week Jen Fox, who's a Democrat running for that. So that's a Republican district, but the Republican only won by a little over 400 votes 2 years ago. So hopefully she can pull that one out. So that's definitely one I'll be watching too. But here again, it's important to vote for the president, but when you got to vote down ballot for Democrats too. Otherwise, the policies that we want to get passed aren't going to get passed if the Republicans win either the House or the Senate at the state level. One other thing, this is the law part of the show. There are 2 contested Minnesota Supreme Court justices on the ballot. Natalie Hudson is the Chief Justice. Hers is one of them. On the ballot, it says incumbent for the incumbent judges. So vote for the incumbents for the Supreme Court and for the one contested Court of Appeals election. Otherwise, a lot of the stuff you're going to be voting for, there's no contest between many of the judges. So, but there are a couple, 3 of them at the one at the Court of Appeals and 2 at the Supreme Court. So keep the incumbents there. So those are the things that I'm going to be watching with Brett, by the sounds of it, part of that night, and with Greg, seeing how these come in. So make sure you get out to vote to take this home, right? And if you voted already, great. But get your friends out, get your family out, get your social media network, people out there and vote. Do something extra that you normally won't do. So this is one reason, as I said a long time ago, that I decided to do this show. My wife, for the first time, has been out door knocking this year, trying to help out Jen Fox down in 41B. So let's work through Election Day and take over, let's win this back. Let's keep the House, the Senate for the state legislature, and let's get the trifecta back at the national level. So when we come back, I'm going to be talking about the media again. Something I've done on a lot of my shows, and I'm going to do it again. So we'll see you on the other side of the break. Welcome back to AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, for another segment of Politics Matter, How Civics Law and Politics Affect You. I'm your host, Bruce Klopfleisch. Send your comments or questions to comment@am950radio.com. So the previous segment was about the election. This segment, as I mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the press. Well, why am I doing this again? Well, maybe you've heard the LA Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, and I found out last night, the Minnesota Tribune are not going to endorse anybody for president. Now, some of them aren't going to endorse anybody, period. But they're at least not endorsing for president. So that was one thing that kind of is caught my attention. I was like, okay, I got to talk about this some more. The other thing was when Trump's own chief of staff, John Kelly, the longest-serving chief of staff, because he had a few, came out and basically said, yeah, Trump is a fascist. He meets the definition of that. You would think that would be splattered all over the main, the first page of the major newspapers around the country. No, it wasn't. Now, they made, some places didn't even mention it. Some places it did, but it was like buried on page 19 of the paper, or they had it inside somewhere else. It wasn't front page news like it should be. So this was another one. It's like, I'm not surprised that this stuff happens with the press, but the fact that they're not endorsing stuff, it's like, okay, it got me mad enough where, all right, I got to talk about the press again here. Because I really think they're dropping the ball in this election and just in general when it comes to politics. Because as I said in a previous show about the double standard of how they treat the Democrats and how they treat the Republicans, I think this just proves that point even more by what they're doing here. So before I get into the details here, I want to just pick on this Minnesota Tribune. Now, I might start calling it the Star Tribune just because I've been reading it for so long. Now they changed the name, but my apologies if I call it the Star Tribune. But they decided not to endorse, and a few of their reasons. I didn't read the whole thing about why the owner, whoever decided to do this, decided to. But part of this is this: they said that we want to let the readers form their own opinions. And my response to that is, okay, well, why even have the press then? Why should we even be reading your paper if you don't want us to form our own if you want us to form our own opinions about stuff? Why should we bother reading your stuff then? It's like, that doesn't make any sense. Are you the press or not? If you're not, fine. Just don't claim that you are. Go put out your paper. But well, we're not gonna. We don't want to get in the middle of this. And then the other one that really caught my attention was, well, we don't want to fuel partisan debates. It's like, oh, come on, really? You've been endorsing for how many elections? And now all of a sudden, in the year 2024, when this is the most consequential election in our recent history, you decide you're not going to endorse. I mean, give me a break. You know what's going on here. You're not pulling the wool over our eyes here. Right? The billionaire owners, I mentioned this before in a previous show, how there's 6 media companies that own 90% of the media in the United States. They all give money to Trump. They all give money to the Republican Party. So when Jeff Bezos decided he's not going to run the editorial staff at the Washington Post already wrote, because he's the owner, he gets to make the ultimate decision and says, no, I ain't going to do it. Same thing with the LA Times. Same thing with the U.S. Today and the Minnesota Tribune. The LA Times also had an editorial endorsing Harris all ready to go, but the billionaire owner said no. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that, well, because they're not endorsing anybody that, it's going to change the election. I'm not saying that at all, but it does show you how much the press is in the bag with the Republican Party, as I've been saying before. So all this talk about, the media is so liberal. No, it's not. And this is a prime example of it, right? The billionaire Republican owners decide, well, we're not going to do it. This just shows you how much the press lacks the spine to go after Trump and the Republican Party. But oh boy, when a Democrat makes some gaffe, like Biden apparently just did with calling Trump supporters garbage, like, oh man, the press is all over it. They're going to be saying this for days and days and bringing it up every hour. You can just imagine how Fox News is covering this. But when Trump says, that the United States is a garbage, and at his rally at Madison Square Garden, the person made a joke about Puerto Rico as being garbage, the intensity of the press simply is not there, as it's going to be on Biden, no doubt. And Harris gave a pretty good speech last night. There's going to be a lot of people in the press that are going to be saying, well, it's just wasn't a good enough speech, or it's stuff we already heard before. This isn't going to get any more votes. I mean, you can just hear the stuff that they're going to print, but yet they can't endorse anybody. Or we want you to form your own opinions. Well, it doesn't sound like it by the coverage that you're doing. You are definitely favoring Republicans or the Democrats. So at a time where in less than a week, at least as I'm taping this show, this country is going to decide if America continues to be a democracy or devolve into an autocracy where Trump and the Republicans are going to start doing their mass deportations. They're going to start jailing his perceived political enemies, like he said, and he's going to turn the military loose in the country, among other things. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we've talked about in covering Project 2025, and there's plenty more that we didn't cover, but 922 pages worth of stuff that they're going to do if they take power. And yet the press, at a time when it's needed, it's like, we're not going to endorse anybody, particularly in the presidential level. I mean, come on. You're not fooling anybody here. So not surprisingly, since most of the press is actually owned by corporations. They are committed to selling us this false equivalence between, two sides. Claiming that this is a close race, putting all their, garbage polls that the Republicans are, provably putting out there that they're not covering. And, doing this both sides shtick that they always do, right? I mean, you hear it all the time. As I tell some, my students, it's like, okay, well, there are times when there aren't both sides. There's one side, the side of the truth versus not being the truth. It really is that simple. But again, you wouldn't know it by how the press is covering this stuff. Because at a time when the differences between the parties is so wide, I mean, there's such a contrast, especially in this election, with completely different visions. The press is failing to concentrate on these differences and going after Trump and the Republicans. I mean, they're not even really, Trump and the Republicans. What policies do they have? I mean, he never really says anything in his speeches about, well, we got to do this, or here's my economic plan. He's not saying any of that stuff. So why isn't the press covering this stuff, or challenging him to do so, and challenging other Republicans and saying, Republicans, well, why isn't Trump putting out stuff? You don't hear that. But boy, you hear, Harris is not giving any policy positions. She's not doing any interviews. Well, neither's Trump, except on Fox News. So instead, we get, Jeff Bezos deciding to do nothing because he doesn't want to offend the Republicans, so that he gets his tax cuts and he gets to keep his readers, by doing this, clickbait stuff that the press loves to do, and and getting advertisers to boost his revenue. Now, I did see a recent number that says 250,000 is the counting and growing number of people who have canceled their Washington Post subscriptions. Now, Bezos is a billionaire, so that number, for at least affecting him directly, isn't, that's probably just a blip on, for his bottom line. But it's going to hurt the Washington Post. And it's going to hurt some of the people who are going to be at the Washington Post. And some of the people on the Washington Post aren't going to be working there anymore if the revenue keeps going down. So, but by not endorsing anybody, they're giving up on their responsibility to tell the truth of what Trump and the Republicans are doing and what they will do if they're elected. And as a result of this, the public has been left confused and divided. I mean, I can't tell you how many times when I'm talking with people, how, well, I don't know what the Republicans are saying in the press because I'm not, they're not printing anything in there. Well, that's probably by design. So the reality is that this election is not between two equally valid political ideologies like the press wants us to believe. This is a stark confrontation between basic principles of good governance and rooted in the Constitution, which is the destruction of that foundation, which is what the Republicans want to do. I mean, Trump himself has said he wants to get rid of the Constitution. He said that a number of times. Yet the media presents this as a legitimate contest, stoking fears of a toss-up election or a too-close-to-call election. And, people are having all kinds of anxiety, right? Maybe you yourself are feeling some of this anxiety as the election day approaches, right? Well, part of this is being feeded by the press. This framing by the press ignores the threat posed by the Republicans' willingness to subvert our democratic institutions, let alone stop people from voting. I mean, the Supreme Court just isn't now allowing Virginia to kick people off their voting rolls less than a week before Election Day. And we know who controls the Supreme Court. It's the Republicans. There's already been lawsuits being filed. There's already Republicans saying, we're going to reject the outcome of this presidential election because they already know Trump is going to lose, hopefully. I think he's going to lose. And I think a lot of Republicans think he's going to lose. So they're already filing lawsuits about this. They're already talking about this, doing again what they did in 2020. So is the media reporting about any of this? No. Why not? Well, they're in the bag with the Republican Party, despite all these claims about a liberal media. And instead of clarifying the stakes, what's at stake in this election? Remember, the media is a profit-driven business model, so that's all they're in. That's all they're there for, is to make money. They're not really there to inform us. This is not a normal election. When one party, the Republicans, endorse an election-dodging candidates, conspiracy theorists, supporters, and they're talking about political violence. And the media is treating the Republican Party in a kinder, gentler way than they're actually treating Democrats who want to save the democracy that the media claims to be serving. All right? So this clickbait form of journalism has poisoned our discourse, reduced legitimate political debates about policy and governance into, shallow arguments about personality and optics, right? And the media loves to try to do these gotcha questions with Democrats. And when they have Republicans on, what do? They just let the Republicans spiel their lies with hardly any pushback. Now, there are a few reporters who are pushing back now, thankfully. But most of the time you watch some of these Sunday shows and, watch mainstream media, they just let the Republicans come on and lie to their faces. And these media people just take it. These so-called reporters, or hosts, they just take it. They just let them lie without any pushback, even though they know they're lying. This is what our media has gone to. The levels that it is now stooped at here. It's like, hopefully when the end of this election comes through, the media will, comes to its senses. Hopefully the Democrats will win here, despite of the press. Enough of this. Well, which candidate, won the debates and who has momentums in the poll. I mean, that's all they're doing here. They're doing this superficial reporting. They're not going at the actual policies. And when we're doing this stuff, the press is actually pissing off a bunch of voters. Now, I hear from some of my students all the time, because I ask them this quite a bit, is, are they going to vote? Some of them say no. Do your parents vote? Some of them say no. Well, why not? Well, some of the reason is, they just don't know who to vote for, given there's such this lack of information out there. Or it's just so confusing. They don't know who to believe because, one paper does this, one paper does that. One news channel does this, one news channel does this. And that's because the press does it that way. They don't need to. But in the name of profits, they are. So no wonder why turnout isn't all that good overall. Now, you're going to hear after Election Day, I'm assuming that turnout rates, if you go by early voting, turnout rates are going to be pretty good. No, I put good in quotes because ultimately it's not going to be that good. You're probably going to see across the country somewhere in the 60% area, low 60s of turnout, which isn't even 2/3 of the voters in the United States bothering to vote in the most consequential election in their lifetime. I'm not going to cheer for that. That's just part of our democracy, unfortunately. There's a lot of people who don't care enough about it to vote for it, in the elections. Now, Minnesota, typically, we're going to be hopefully we're in the 80s. We've been around there, in plenty of elections. Normally, we're close to the top turnout. But still, what can you do to get more turnout in these elections because of what's at stake? I wish the entire United States would be up in the 80%, but it's not going to happen. And part of the reason is there's just a lot of people who aren't going to vote, in part because of the crappy coverage that the press gives. So by treating this election as just another normal election, the media has allowed dangerous ideas and a dangerous party to creep into the mainstream, consciousness without any consequence. The media is playing a role in legitimizing those who want to reject the basic ideals of democracy. The media should just frame this election as, well, you're either for democracy or you're not. It really is, that simple, as I've said before. But they're not going to see it that way. Isn't journalism supposed to serve the public and to inform and educate people? Well, no, apparently it isn't. Now it's entertainment and exploitation of people in the name of profits. So this is a huge disservice to the public when the survival of our democracy is at stake. So we as citizens must demand better from our press. Especially when one station, Fox so-called news, is merely a mouthpiece for the Republican Party. When we don't have a functioning press committed to telling the truth, democracy may not survive. So institutions like the press and like our government are made up of people. And if the people don't have a backbone like Bezos and other people in the media, then the media as an institution is going to go down, which is what the authoritarians and what the fascists want, and which, by the way, is wanted in Project 2025, going after the press. So the other institutions in our free society will go down too. I mean, that's one of the tenets of fascism, is taking over the press. And that's what is likely to happen if they just keep, well, we're not going to endorse anybody. Or we're not going to go after the Republicans. And this is going to make the rest of the world, how the rest of the world is looking at us right now. I mean, they're laughing at us, literally. It's like, how are you potentially going to elect Trump again? What is up with that? And that's a good question, right? Especially for those people who are fighting for democracy in foreign countries, and they're looking at us with how close this election is going to be. And how the Republicans even have a shot at winning the House or the Senate. With the crappy policies they have out there. And another thing that I think just clinches this is the Washington Post. Their tagline is, democracy dies in darkness. Right? Well, by not endorsing, you are making us one step closer to democracy dying. Thank you, Jeff Bezos and the rest of the media, for nothing. After all, this is up to us now. This is up to us. You got to get out there and vote, despite what the press is telling you. Do your own research. Get out there and vote. And let's win these elections, despite the press. All right, this is the end of this section. So we'll come back where I might do another section, or I might just talk for the few minutes I have left. We'll see. So coming back at the other side of the break. Welcome back to AM 950, the Progressive Voice of Minnesota, for the third and quick final segment of Politics Matters, How Civics, Politics, and Law Affect You. I'm your host, Bruce Klopfleisch. So, for this last section, we don't have enough time to finish the Constitution, which is what I was kind of planning on doing. But I was also planning on, talking about the election and talking about the press. I'm probably going to go, long on those, which I ended up doing. But that's fine. So, as Brett mentioned earlier, he and I are going to be doing election night, at least from 9 to 11 roughly, here at the station. So we can kind of treat this last 3 minutes or so as kind of a warm-up for that, Brett. So, I've talked a little bit about some of the races that I'm going to be watching. There's some that you're going to be paying particular attention to.
You mentioned it during your segment a few minutes ago, but that Nebraska Senate race is super interesting to me because that had been floating under the radar. I had not even known about that till I randomly saw some ads for the guy who's running down there, Dan Osborne, pop up on a streaming service I have, and I think, why am I getting an ad for this, and who is this guy? Then I looked it up and saw, well, this is really a close race. So that's what I'm keeping an eye on, because even if this guy doesn't caucus with the Democrats if he wins, still one less vote for Republicans, which could be key. So that one I'm going to watch. And I'm hoping Ted Cruz goes down in Texas. I think there's a chance that could finally happen. So, yeah, I'm definitely following those Senate races pretty closely, because that's where all that power is going to come when we talk about confirming judges and getting Supreme Court justices on the bench. You got to have control of the Senate.
Yep. And that one in Nebraska, I hadn't really been paying attention much to that one either. But, then I watched some show where he was on as a guest. And, I was listening to him like, geez, I can, because I had heard the Democrats didn't run anybody down there, and through their support to him. And after listening to him, I was like, well, I can see why. I mean, he's not, a typical progressive Democrat by any means, but he's a union guy, and I think a lot of his positions are more on the side of the Democrats, which he might end up being voting for. But Brett, can you imagine a scenario if it's like the Democrats and the Republicans are, almost tied or something, and then and he wins, let's say, and he's the independent?
Yeah, the nightmare scenario, or perhaps fun scenario from his perspective, would probably be Kamala Harris becomes president, Republicans have 50 seats, Democrats have 49 in the Senate, right, and he has all the power in the world.
Right.
That would give him a ton of leverage. Kind of hope that doesn't happen. I'd like to see him win, but not under a scenario where it's like 50-49.
Right. I mean, that would really be quite the conclusion to the election, right, if that happens.
I mean, it would be better than a Republican majority, but
right,
it wouldn't be ideal.
So what about in the state of Minnesota? You watching any of those in particular?
I don't know the name of the district off the top of my head, but there's one, I believe it's like kind of the Rogers area, that's about a 6 or 7 point Republican district, and as we watch results come in for there, I think if the Democrats, even if they don't necessarily win that seat, if they're able to keep it within a few percentage points, I think it's going to be a good night for them. So that one I'm going to keep an eye on. I think that's like the Rogers, St. Michaelville, Aberville, and I apologize, I don't know the district number off the top of my head. So, yeah, that's going to be... I think the Democrats have a good shot at holding that stuff, the House and the Senate. But, this is what we have elections for, so get out there and vote. So we will talk to you next week after the election.